Hello everyone, I hope you're enjoying the online content of JASM 2022 so far, and thank you for tuning in to my presentation today. My name is Audrey-Anne Loisel and I'm a PhD student at Montreal University in Québec, Canada. And today, I'm here to talk to you about some of the results of my thesis. So my PhD is actually part of a larger project that involves 3 researchers, 4 undergrad students, and multiple partners, which are Nature Conservancy Canada, the Canuck Research Institute, and Uranus. Together, we study the hydrodynamics of Lake Papineau and its wetlands. So why Lake Papineau? Well, it's partially comprised in a natural reserve, but it's also home of a private fishing game resort as well as a research institute. As the territory has multiple uses that could be threatened by climate and land use changes, NCC and Canuck decided to reach out to researchers to develop a project to study the past, present, and future hydrodynamic of the lake. They also wanted to know more about the ecology and biodiversity of its wetlands to be able to target and protect the sensitive zones around the lake, which provide important ecosystem functions and services. And that is exactly where I come in. I study the synergies and trade-offs among ecosystem functions and services of different types of lake edge wetlands. But before I go further, let's break it down piece by piece. First, lake edge wetlands are ecosystems found at the junction between aquatic and terrestrial environments, but they are not transition zones or ecotones. They're standalone ecosystems that are very often richer than the other ecosystems around them. However, it's very difficult to find information about them in the literature, as they're kind of the forgotten child of the wetlands. Unless you work in the Great Lakes, but they have a very different hydrodynamic than that of smaller lakes, such as Lake Papineau. And I'm interested in 3 different types of lake edge wetlands: peatlands, ash swamps, and alder swamps. Why is it interesting to compare different types? Well, first, because the variables that we use to classify wetlands are the same ones that we use to quantify ecosystem functions and services. For instance, just by using their class, we could assume that a forested peatland would be better at carbon storage than a marsh. The second reason is because conservation, restoration, and even legal actions call for such comparative approaches. With no net loss policies, what we're trying to do is avoid replacing a forested peatland that stores carbon by a marsh that, yes, increases water quality, but does not fill the gap that we're trying to fill. But here again, the differences among types of wetland is still not well known, especially for lake edge wetlands. Why? Well, because most studies either tend to pool all wetlands together, study a single type of wetland, or just study a few ecosystem functions and services. But why not study all services? Well, because there's a lot of them. There are multiple different types of supporting, cultural, provisioning, and regulation services. And so we have to choose. Not only that, we also have to be able to get the data to quantify them. And for some services, it's highly more complicated than for others. Biodiversity is particularly ill-studied because it requires more time, money, and expertise to quantify. And so we tend to round corners and use proxies such as land use covers. The main problem of this method is that it assumes a lot of interactions without quantifying them, and it leads to large error margins, especially at small scales. Other methods, such as mathematical equations, can give more precise values. They're based on the aggregation of different indicators. Multiply A by B divided by C and bingo, you've got water quality. And the problem with this method is that nobody uses the same equations, making comparison among studies very difficult. Also, the indicators that we choose to put in those equations can have a major impact on the results we will get. So, as you can see, quantifying ecosystem functions and services is no easy task, and we still need to work on it. And so, what would be a good method to simultaneously study multiple services in multiple wetland types? Synergies and Tradeoffs. Synergies and trade-offs can be used to study the interactions among ecosystem functions and services in a comparative manner. When 2 services are in synergy, it means that they tend to increase together. When there is a trade-off, it means that the increase of a service is linked to the decrease of another. And so how is this useful to us? Well, this approach allows us to understand the impacts of our conservation decisions. For instance, if we decided to target wetlands maximizing the service X here in our management plan, we would indirectly target Y, since X and Y are in spatial synergy. However, we would also systematically exclude Z because X and Z are in spatial trade-off. So if we take this into account in our decision making, we can make more informed decisions and avoid accidental losses of functions and services. With all of this in mind, we realized that we had to aim for some of the targets that have been missed so far for lake-edge wetlands. And so for this project, we decided we needed to go for a method that included a large number of functions and services, explored different facets of biodiversity, compared multiple types of wetlands, and used the approach of synergies and trade-offs. And with that, we asked two questions. How contrasted are the ecosystem functions and services provided by three different types of lake-edge wetlands? And what are the synergies and trade-offs among the indicators of those services, and how does it affect their quantification? And to answer these questions, we sampled Lake Papineau's wetlands. As I've mentioned before, this territory has multiple uses, but overall low human impact and high recreational potential. According to this scale and context, we chose 8 ecosystem functions and services to quantify: biodiversity, support to pollinators, water regulation, erosion control, carbon storage, fishing, recreation, and aestheticism. We quantified 25 indicators for these 8 services, and to choose our indicators, we scoured the literature to make sure to account for every interaction. Therefore, some indicators can be linked to more than one service. For instance, the percentage of organic carbon in the soil is directly linked to carbon storage. However, we also know that peat is a very absorbent substrate, and so it can play a major role in water regulation. Therefore, this indicator is linked to 2 services. We did this work for all of the 25 indicators. And when it comes to biodiversity, we went all out. We sampled the taxonomic diversity of plants, birds, fish, zooplankton, and singing insects, as well as the functional diversity of 4 of these groups. We also quantified the rare species abundance and habitat diversity using the Shannon Index. And we did all of this for 37 wetlands of 3 different types. Now, to quantify our ecosystem functions and services, we used a principal coordinate analysis and computed the centroid for each type of wetland. We then quantified the strength of the association between the indicators and the centroid using cosine similarities. Cosine similarities are based on the angle between the indicator and the centroid. Acute angles indicate synergies, obtuse angles indicate trade-offs, and right angle indicate no interaction. To compare the general pattern of provisioning, we looked at the main services provided by each wetland type using a 0.75 threshold for the cosine similarities. This means that to consider a service as significantly provided by a wetland type, we needed at least one of its indicators to have a cosine similarity with the centroid of 0.75 or higher. Finally, to see if indicator choice affected service quantification, we looked at the cosine similarities between all possible pairs of the 25 indicators. And finally, here are the results. The table you see here presents the cosine similarities of our 25 indicators with each wetland type centroid: peatland, alder swamps, and ash swamps. In blue, you have the strong positive associations, so synergies, and in red, you have the strong negative associations, so trade-offs. On the right, you have the graphical representation of the PCOA with peatlands in orange, alder swamps in purple, and ash swamps in teal. Our 3 types of wetland were quite well separated in the ordination, and each type of wetland maximized different indicators. And if we look at the table, we can see a mirror effect between the peatlands and the ash swamps. They're literally opposites. And if we then focus only on biodiversity indicators, we can see that it goes in all directions and each type of wetland supports different aspects of it. Peatlands supported singing insects, bird and zooplankton diversity, alder swamps supported fish abundance and diversity, and ash swamps supported plant diversity. So as much as we would like it to, we cannot reduce biodiversity to a single metric. It is much more complex than that. Now, if we look at the provisioning patterns using the 0.75 threshold, this is what we get. And we can see quite diverging provisioning patterns. For instance, while fishing is mainly supported by alder swamps, water regulation is mainly supported by peatlands. And while they all support biodiversity, as I have just shown you, they support different aspects of it. So we would need a combination of the 3 classes to conserve all of the taxes. And finally, if we look at all the pairs of interactions between our 25 indicators, we get this monster. I know it's a lot of information, but what should be noted here is that the indicators of some services are in synergy, while for other services, it's more complicated. For example, all the pairs of indicators associated with support to pollinators, water regulation, recreation, and fishing are in blue, so they're synergies. It means that these services are robust to the choice of indicator. So if I was to choose only one indicator to quantify them, I would get similar results no matter what I choose. On the other hand, when we look at what's happening for biodiversity, erosion control, carbon storage, and aestheticisms, we have a mix of red and blue, so synergies and trade-off. So for these services, the choice of indicator has a direct consequence on the quantity of service that we will calculate. And for biodiversity, it's particularly true. So if I sum it all up, what we were able to show with this study is that yes, different types of lake edge wetlands do present different patterns of ecosystem functions and services. Most importantly, each type of wetland supported different aspects of biodiversity. We also showed that for some services, indicator choice can have a major impact on provisioning patterns. This allows us to conclude that the way we study wetland functions and services influences the conclusions that we will make. And this can have important consequences on the way we manage the territory. Choosing what we conserve, what we restore, and how we do it is directly linked to our understanding of how these different types of wetland function. If we can improve our knowledge of these differences, we can certainly improve the outcomes of wetland restoration. Finally, I would like to thank all of the people involved in this project, especially my co-directors, Dr. Stéphanie Pallerin and Dr. Raphaël Proux. Thank you for watching, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or come chat with me at JASM 2022 about wetlands.